The small voice-activated recorder behind the kitchen clock cost $27. It captured conversations Margaret and Frank Chen never knew were being recorded. Conversations that would either save them or destroy what little peace they'd found after burying their daughter 6 months ago. In their modest San Jose ranch home, where grief still hung heavy as morning fog, a caretaker's honey-smooth voice floated through the speaker on Jamie Chen's laptop. "You want Jamie to have security, don't you? This new will ensures that. David has plenty, but you need to sign before the lawyer questions your capacity." Jamie's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the device. His grandparents, Margaret, 76, a retired librarian with a master's degree, and Frank, 78, a stroke survivor whose mind remained sharp even as his body struggled, were being manipulated by the very person hired to save them. Simone Wallace had impeccable references, a nursing degree, and an extraordinary gift for anticipating needs. She'd pulled Frank and Margaret back from the edge of despair after their daughter Linda's death from cancer, teaching Frank to walk again, making Margaret laugh for the first time in months. She'd also convinced them to change their will, sign over power of attorney, and transfer a quarter interest in their home, all while making them believe it was their idea. But here's what haunts families in the quiet hours. How do you prove someone you love is being exploited when they insist they're fine? When the person hurting them is also the person keeping them alive? Have you ever watched someone you care about trust the wrong person and wondered if speaking up would do more harm than staying silent? Stay with us to discover how one grandson's desperate surveillance, 2 elderly parents' hard-won clarity, and 47 hours of recorded evidence became the difference between justice and another predator moving on to her next victim. Because sometimes the hardest fight isn't against the system. It's convincing the people you love that they deserve to be protected. This is the story of how a family learned that dignity and vulnerability can coexist, that technology can be both weapon and bridge, and that reclaiming your voice sometimes means first admitting you lost it. The house still smelled wrong. Margaret Chen stood in the doorway of her daughter's childhood bedroom, one hand gripping the frame for balance. 6 months since Linda's death, and she still couldn't bring herself to open the windows. The air hung stale and heavy, preserving something Margaret couldn't name. Loss, maybe, or the particular weight of a life interrupted. She'd meant to donate the clothes, had even gotten as far as folding Linda's high school volleyball jerseys into a cardboard mouse before her hands stopped working, before the simple act of touching polyester became unbearable. The box sat half-packed on the floor, a monument to good intentions and complete failure. In the living room, Frank occupied his recliner like a general abandoned by his army. The television played without sound, some nature documentary, lions stalking gazelles, while Frank stared at a point 3 feet beyond the screen. His left hand lay useless in his lap. 8 months post-stroke, and he'd given up pretending he'd ever use it again. Margaret made her way to the kitchen, where last night's dishes waited alongside this morning's coffee cups and what might have been Tuesday's lunch plates. She couldn't remember. Time had become fluid, days bleeding into each other like watercolors left in the rain. The phone rang, David's daily check-in, punctual as mortality. "Mom, how's Dad doing?" Margaret looked toward the living room, where Frank hadn't moved in 3 hours. "Fine," she said. "We're both fine." The lie tasted familiar. She'd been fine for months now. Fine when she forgot to eat. Fine when she wore the same nightgown 4 days running. Fine when she woke at 3 a.m., convinced Linda was calling from the hospital again, asking why nobody came. "I'm flying down tomorrow," David said. "Dad's follow-up with Dr. Patel." Tomorrow. Margaret tried to picture tomorrow. But the future had become as foreign as the past was inescapable. "We'll be ready," she said, and hung up before he could ask if she'd taken her own medications. if Frank had done his physical therapy exercises, if they'd managed anything resembling a functional day. The kitchen clock said 2:30. Afternoon then. Margaret opened the refrigerator and found containers she didn't recognize. Food gone to archaeology. She closed it again. In Linda's room, dust motes drifted through slanted light. Margaret had loved this room once, had painted the walls that particular shade of yellow because Linda said it felt like morning. Now, it felt like a tomb she visited daily, a shrine to the person she'd failed to save. Frank appeared in the doorway, walker scraping against hardwood. "Should we?" His words came slow, dragged up from somewhere deep. "Eat something?" Margaret looked at her husband. This man she'd known for 58 years, who now moved through their home like a ghost haunting his own life. They'd survived raising 2 children, survived decades of small wars and smaller victories. But Linda's death had broken something structural, some load-bearing beam of their marriage, and now they stood in the rubble, unable to remember how to build shelter. "I don't know," Margaret said. It was the most honest thing she'd said in months. That night, after Frank had shuffled back to his recliner and Margaret had managed to heat a can of soup they barely touched, David's rental car pulled into the driveway 12 hours early. When he walked through the front door and saw his father's weight loss, his mother's unwashed hair, the chaos of their once immaculate home, his face went carefully blank in the way Margaret recognized from Linda's funeral, that lawyer's mask he wore when things were catastrophically bad. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're fixing this." Simone Wallace arrived on a Tuesday morning with a rolling suitcase, a leather portfolio, and the kind of competence that filled a room. "Mrs. Chen? I'm Simone. Your son hired me through Comfort Care Solutions." Margaret stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of her stained cardigan, her unwashed hair. This woman was younger than Linda would have been, with careful makeup and scrubs that somehow looked professional rather than medical. Her smile reached her eyes. "I've brought some things for breakfast," Simone said, hefting a canvas bag. "Nothing fancy, just fresh bread, good coffee. May I come in?" Margaret stepped aside, watching the stranger navigate her kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd seen worse. Simone moved efficiently, clearing counter space, starting coffee, heating a skillet. Within minutes, the house smelled like food instead of decay. Frank appeared, drawn by unfamiliar sounds. "Mr. Chen." Simone wiped her hands on a dish towel, then extended one. "I'm here to help with whatever you need." Frank regarded her with suspicion. He'd fired the last 2 home health aides David sent, one for treating him like a child, the other for pitying him. "Can you?" he started, then stopped, frustrated by his own halting speech. "Can I what?" Simone asked, no impatience in her voice. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." "Play chess?" Simone's laugh was genuine. "Badly. But I'm an excellent loser." Something in Frank's face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. Over breakfast, actual breakfast, with scrambled eggs and toast and fresh fruit, Simone asked questions. Not medical questions or the invasive personal queries other caretakers had posed, but simple things. What music did Frank like? When had Margaret last painted? Had Linda loved this house? That last question made Margaret's throat close. "She did," she managed. "She grew up here. Her room is still exactly as she left it," Simone finished gently. "That's okay. There's no timeline for grief." The next days fell into rhythm. Simone arrived at 7, departed at 6, and in those 11 hours, she transformed their chaos into something resembling life. She didn't push. She suggested. Maybe Mr. Chen would like to walk to the corner today. Perhaps Mrs. Chen would enjoy sorting through old photographs. She cooked dishes that tasted like Linda's favorites. Ginger chicken, egg drop soup. The flavors triggered memories that hurt and soothed simultaneously. During Frank's physical therapy, which he had been refusing for months, Simone told stories about her own grandmother's stroke recovery. She didn't minimize his struggle or offer false hope. She just understood. The body heals slower than we want, she said, guiding his left arm through exercises. But it does heal. Linda would want you to try. Linda's name in Simone's mouth should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like permission. By week's end, Margaret found herself looking forward to Simone's arrival. Found herself showering, changing clothes, wanting to be presentable for this woman who treated their grief like something natural rather than shameful. Frank was walking 20 feet with his walker, then 30. His appetite returned. He laughed at Simone's terrible chess strategy. Friday evening, after Simone left, Margaret sat at the kitchen table with David on speakerphone. "She's wonderful," Margaret said. "She understands." David's relief was audible. "I'm glad, Mom. You both deserve help." After they hung up, Margaret noticed how quiet the house felt without Simone's presence. How empty. She checked the schedule Simone had posted on the refrigerator. Monday through Friday, 7 to 6. The weekend stretched ahead like a desert. In his recliner, Frank was already asking when Simone would return. Neither of them questioned why they'd become so dependent so quickly. Neither recognized the architecture being built, invisible at first, but already load-bearing. Jamie Chen sat in his Civic 3 blocks from his grandparents' house, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might save him from drowning. He'd driven from Oakland without planning to. Friday afternoon, staring at code that wouldn't compile. And suddenly he was on 101 South with a bag of Thai takeout cooling in the passenger seat. Making amends, he told himself. Except amends required facing people he'd abandoned when they needed him most. His mother had died on September 12th. He'd been in Seattle at a conference, phone silenced during a keynote about distributed systems. By the time he saw the messages, 17 of them, timestamps climbing toward panic, Linda was gone. His last conversation with her had been 3 weeks earlier. "I'm sorry, Mom. Hospital's just... I can't." She'd said she understood. She'd lied. Jamie killed the engine and forced himself out of the car. The house looked different. Better. The lawn was trimmed, the porch swept. Evening light catching clean windows. 6 months ago, visiting for the funeral, everything had felt abandoned. Like his grandparents had left their bodies behind and were haunting the property out of obligation. He knocked. Footsteps, then his grandmother's face in the doorway, but transformed. Her hair was brushed. She wore actual clothes instead of his mother's old cardigan, and her eyes held something besides the hollow grief he remembered. "Jamie," she blinked. "You didn't call." "I wanted to surprise you." Behind her, a woman appeared. Late 30s, warm smile, professional scrubs. "You must be the grandson. I'm Simone. I help your grandparents. Come in, come in." The kitchen smelled like ginger and garlic. Real food. His grandfather sat at the table, Walker beside him, playing what looked like an actual game of solitaire instead of staring at muted television. "Jamie brought Thai food," Margaret said, uncertain. "Perfect timing," Simone said, smoothly. "I was just finishing dinner prep, but Thai sounds wonderful. Mr. Chen, what do you think?" His grandfather looked up, and Jamie saw calculation in his eyes, the engineer's mind still working, even if the body moved slowly. "Jamie, good to see you." The words came easier than 6 months ago. Speech therapy, Jamie realized. Someone had gotten him to speech therapy. Over dinner, Simone asked about his work with genuine interest, not the performative questions relatives asked before changing subjects. She knew what APIs were. She'd heard of his company. When he mentioned debugging distributed databases, she laughed and said, "Sounds like caregiving. Everything works until suddenly nothing does, and you have to trace it back to the source." But Jamie noticed things. The way Simone answered when his grandmother's phone rang, speaking briefly before hanging up. The rearranged photos on the mantel, ones that felt wrong, compositions slightly off. And when he asked about finances, about whether they needed help with bills, Simone redirected. "Your grandfather's pension handles everything beautifully. No need to worry." Except Jamie's programmer brain caught the deflection. No need to worry wasn't an answer. That night, staying in his childhood room, Jamie heard Simone's voice through the heating vents. The old house carried sound like a confession. She was on the phone in the kitchen below. "The son's manageable. He's in Seattle. The grandson's the variable, but he'll leave by Sunday." Jamie's pulse quickened. He opened his laptop, hands already moving. Started a document. Observations, timestamps, questions. Then he saw it. A business card on his desk, probably carried up with his bag. Everett and Song, estate attorneys. An appointment circled. Monday, 2 p.m. He went downstairs, found his grandmother washing dishes, Simone gone to her apartment. "Grandma, do you have a lawyer appointment Monday?" Margaret's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Simone handles those things." "What things?" "I don't know. Paperwork. She said it's normal." Jamie looked at his grandmother. This woman who'd taught him to read, who'd earned a master's degree, who'd run a reference desk for 30 years, and saw someone who'd forgotten she was allowed to ask questions. "I'm staying through the week," he said. Saturday morning, Jamie waited until Simone drove Margaret to a grief support group before moving. The voice-activated recorder cost $27 on Amazon, arrived same day. Small enough to hide behind the kitchen clock, sensitive enough to catch conversations from anywhere in the room. He felt sick installing it. This was his grandparents' home, their privacy. But Simone's phone call played on loop in his mind. The grandson's the variable. He photographed the rearranged photos, noting the poor Photoshop work. Downloaded the estate attorney's website, specializing in elder planning. Checked Simone's references from the folder his dad had, left on the counter. 2 disconnected numbers. One woman who said, "No comment," and hung up before he could explain. His grandfather found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, notes scattered. "What are you doing?" Frank's words came slowly, each one deliberate. "Research." "On Simone?" Jamie met his grandfather's eyes. "Yes." Frank lowered himself into a chair. They sat in silence. The engineer and the programmer, both trained to solve problems through systematic observation. "Your grandmother is happier," Frank finally said. "I know. Simone got me walking again, cooking again, laughing. I know that too. But something feels wrong." Jamie exhaled. "Yeah." Sunday evening, Jamie sat in his Civic 3 blocks away, laptop connected to the recorder via Bluetooth. Told Simone he was heading back to Oakland. Instead, he waited. At 8 p.m., Simone's voice came through clear. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting Jamie taken care of. David's doing fine. His partnership means he doesn't need help. But Jamie's been struggling since Linda died. Student loans, rent in Oakland. She worried about him constantly, remember?" His grandmother's voice, small. "She did worry." This new will ensures he's protected. Just a small change. The house and pension go to Jamie instead of being split. You can sign Monday, and it's done. His grandfather, halting. Should we tell David first? He'll just worry and create legal complications. You're protecting your grandson. That's what Linda would want. Pause. Then Margaret. I suppose that makes sense. Jamie's hands shook so badly he had to set down the laptop. She was using his mother's name. Using his own supposed struggles, he didn't have student loans, his rent was fine. To manipulate them, creating urgency, isolating them from David. He had the recording, he had proof. Monday morning, Jamie arrived before Simone, played the recording for his grandparents at the kitchen table. His grandmother's face crumpled. His grandfather looked stricken. Then Margaret whispered, "You were spying on us?" "Grandma, she's manipulating." "You put a device in our home without asking." His grandfather's words came hard. "Simone saved us. Where were you when your mother was dying?" The question landed like a physical blow. Jamie had no defense, no explanation that didn't sound like cowardice. He'd avoided hospitals because seeing his mother deteriorate triggered panic attacks. He'd missed her final weeks because grief was easier to manage from distance. He'd failed the one test that mattered. "If we lose Simone," Margaret said, voice breaking, "we go back to being alone. Is that what you want?" Jamie looked at his grandparents and understood the terrible truth. They knew they were being manipulated. But Simone's presence, even compromised, even transactional, felt better than the alternative, better than returning to that hollow house where grief had nearly killed them both. They chose her over the truth. And Jamie had no idea how to save people who didn't want saving. Jamie paced the driveway, phone clamped to his ear, watching his grandparents' car disappear around the corner. Simone driving, his grandparents in back like passengers in their own lives. "Hold for Mr. Chen," the assistant said. Jamie had 30 minutes, maybe less. The lawyer's office was in San Mateo, 40 minutes there, however long the appointment took, 40 back. He'd debated following them, confronting Simone in the parking lot, physically preventing them from signing. But that would only accelerate whatever timeline she was working. "Jamie." David's voice clipped with deposition mode focus. "What's wrong? Listen to this." Jamie played the recording, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped the phone. Silence stretched across the line. Then, "I'm getting on the next flight. Don't let them sign anything." "They left an hour ago." More silence. Jamie heard his brother breathing. That controlled attorney breathing, that meant he was calculating options, running scenarios, building a case in real time. "The firm is Everett and Song?" David asked. "Yeah, I looked them up. Legitimate, but they specialize in elder estate planning. Reviews mention fast turnarounds, minimal family consultation." "Of course they do." David's keyboard clicked in the background. "There's a 6:45 flight. I'll be at SFO by 9. Pick me up?" "I'll be there." Jamie spent the waiting hours researching. Everett and Song had processed 247 estate modifications in the past 3 years. Impressive volume for a small firm. No complaints filed with the Bar Association, but online reviews told a different story. Adult children discovering will changes after parents died. Families fractured over surprise beneficiaries, lawyers who answered to whoever paid them, rather than the person signing. At 7 p.m., David emerged from baggage claim looking like he'd aged 5 years since the funeral. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and when he hugged Jamie, his older brother's grip felt desperate rather than protective. They drove back in tense silence. The house glowed warmly when they arrived. Classical music drifted through open windows. The smell of roasted chicken made Jamie's stomach clench. Simone had cooked dinner, as if this were any normal Monday evening. She greeted them at the door with perfect professionalism. "David, what a lovely surprise. Your parents had a wonderful day. Signed some paperwork, went to the garden center, bought plants for Linda's memorial plot." Therapeutic normalcy. She'd framed legal manipulation as grief work. At dinner, Margaret and Frank were animated, discussing perennials and mulch and whether the corner got enough sun. Simone had orchestrated this too, a good day to offset the brothers' suspicions. David probed gently. "What kind of paperwork did you sign, Mom?" "Oh, just updating things." Margaret waved her hand vaguely. "Simone explained it protects Jamie," Frank added, his words coming easier now after weeks of speech therapy. "Nothing complicated. She made sure we understood everything." After Simone retreated to the garage apartment, when had she moved in? David tried reasoning with his parents in the living room. Jamie watched his brother deploy every attorney's skill: calm voice, logical arguments, gentle questions designed to reveal inconsistencies. Margaret's response: "You're in Seattle living your life. Simone is here every day." Frank: "We're competent to make our own decisions." David's jaw tightened, but he backed off. Pushing harder would only drive them deeper into Simone's arms. That night, Jamie showed David everything. The disconnected reference numbers, the photoshopped pictures, the business card that had appeared and disappeared. David listened with an attorney's focus, occasionally asking questions, building his mental case file. "We need an elder law specialist," David finally said. "Someone who handles undue influence cases. This is going to be expensive and complicated, and we can't afford mistakes." "So I stay and keep documenting?" "Yeah. I'll find us a lawyer and research her background." David rubbed his face. "Jamie, they're not going to thank us for this." "I know. They might choose her over us." "I know that too." Tuesday morning, David flew back to Seattle. Jamie opened his laptop to start another day of coding and surveillance. Then he saw the documents on the kitchen counter: healthcare proxy and power of attorney, both listing Simone Wallace as primary decision-maker. Notarized yesterday, while they'd been at the lawyer's office. His grandparents had just given Simone legal control over their lives, and Jamie had no idea how to take it back. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of deliberate routine. Jamie positioned his laptop on the kitchen table, opened his IDE, and wrote code that his mind barely registered. His real work happened in the margins: monitoring audio feeds, time-stamping conversations, building a database of manipulation. He'd installed 2 additional recorders, one near Frank's recliner, where Simone conducted her most intimate conversations, another in the living room, catching the casual remarks that revealed her methodology. The recordings painted a disturbing portrait. Simone never threatened. She created dependence through intermittent reinforcement, some days warm and attentive, others slightly withdrawn, making them work for her approval. When David called Tuesday afternoon, Simone answered Margaret's phone. "She's resting." "Yes, I'll tell her you called. Love you too." She hung up, then told Margaret 20 minutes later. David sounded stressed. Maybe we shouldn't burden him with small things right now. Editing his words, controlling information flow. Jamie documented it all. 47 hours of recordings. Simone redirecting mail to a P.O. box to reduce clutter. Simone suggesting Margaret's friend Diane seemed judgmental about your grief process. Maybe give it time before seeing her again. Systematically severing connections. But complications emerged that made Jamie's hands shake over his keyboard. Frank was genuinely improving. 20-minute walks now, his gait steadier, speech therapy progressing. Words came faster, clearer. He'd regained 8 pounds. Sat in the garden, sketching mechanical designs, his engineer's mind reawakening. Margaret had started painting again. Watercolors of Linda's garden, therapeutic work Simone encouraged. She'd completed 3 pieces, delicate renderings of peonies and lavender that captured grief transforming into something survivable. Jamie stared at his evidence spreadsheet. Column A, manipulation tactics. Column B, genuine care provided. Both columns were equally full. Wednesday evening, he called David during his nightly check-in. She's exploiting them, but she's also keeping them alive. How do we separate those things? We find other care, David said, his attorney voice steady. First, we need to break her legal hold. David had contacted Martha Reyes, an elder law attorney who specialized in undue influence cases. She needed proof Simone had isolated them, created dependency, and leveraged that for financial gain. The recordings were good, but they needed to demonstrate Margaret and Frank feared losing Simone enough to act against their own interests. Thursday, Jamie captured the evidence Martha needed. Margaret's voice, uncertain. I don't think we should change the trust without telling David first. Simone's response, honey over steel. But if you wait, the lawyers might question your capacity. Better to do it now, while you're clearly competent. Once you're older, they could claim you weren't in your right mind. Creating urgency. Weaponizing fear around cognitive decline. Jamie played it for David that night. His brother was silent for a long moment. That's textbook undue influence. We have her. But Jamie sat alone in his childhood bedroom after the call, listening to his grandfather's labored breathing through the heating vents, watching his grandmother's light stay on past midnight. They had evidence. But evidence required confrontation, legal proceedings, the dismantling of the only structure keeping his grandparents functional. Friday morning, he found Frank in the garden, Walker planted beside the bench, hands steady as he sketched a trellis design. "You're still here," Frank said. Not a question. "I'm not leaving." His grandfather nodded slowly. "Your mother would have liked that." Jamie swallowed hard. Linda had asked him to visit during her final weeks. He'd made excuses, work deadlines, conference commitments, cowardice dressed as responsibility. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for her," Jamie said. Frank's good hand reached out, gripped his wrist. "You're here now. That's what matters." But as Jamie returned to his laptop, to his spreadsheets of evidence and timelines, he wondered, was he here for them? Or was he here for himself, trying to prove he wasn't the grandson who abandoned family when it mattered most? The recordings played on. Simone's voice, always patient, always knowing exactly what they needed to hear. Truth and lies were getting harder to separate. Saturday morning broke clear and warm, the kind of Northern California spring day that made grief feel like betrayal. How dare the world be beautiful when Linda was gone? Simone announced the project over breakfast. "I've been thinking about Linda, about creating something permanent to honor her." Margaret's coffee cup stilled halfway to her lips. "A memorial garden," Simone continued, spreading landscape sketches across the table. "In the backyard corner, where the sun hits longest. Peonies, lavender, white roses, her favorites, you said." Frank leaned forward, his good hand tracing the design. Linda loved peonies, planted them herself years ago. "I know," Simone said softly. "You told me. I thought we could restore them, at a stone bench, somewhere you could sit with her memory." Jamie watched from the doorway, laptop forgotten. This was masterful. genuinely therapeutic while deepening their emotional debt. They'd owe Simone for giving them Linda back in some small way. By 10 o'clock, they were in the garden. Simone had purchased plants, mulch, garden tools. She'd thought of everything. Margaret knelt in the dirt, hands working soil, tears streaming silently down her face. Linda was 8 when we planted the first garden together. She got mud everywhere. Didn't care. She said flowers were like people. Needed good roots or they couldn't grow. Frank supervised from his folding chair, occasionally correcting details. The roses go deeper. Linda always said shallow roots meant weak blooms. Simone photographed everything. Candid shots of Margaret planting, Frank directing, the garden taking shape. She'd post them to the private Facebook group she'd created for distant family. Controlling the narrative, showing herself as healing facilitator. Jamie stood at the kitchen window, torn apart. This was exactly what his grandparents needed. Permission to engage with Linda's memory without drowning in it. Physical work that honored her. Simone was providing the care he couldn't. The emotional architecture that made survival possible. But she was also calculating her return on investment. Every flower planted was currency. Every shared memory was collateral. By late afternoon, the garden existed. Peonies in careful rows, lavender bordering the path, white roses climbing a new trellis. The stone bench Simone had ordered sat perfectly positioned, an inscription already carved. Linda's garden. Margaret sat there as sunset painted the sky, hands muddy, face transformed. Not happy. Happiness would come later, if ever. But present. Connected to something beyond grief's undertow. That evening, emboldened by their contentment, Jamie tried a different approach. They sat in the living room, Frank in his recliner, Margaret on the couch beside Jamie. He told them about Linda's final weeks, about his cowardice, his hospital anxiety, his desperate phone calls that went unanswered because Linda was too weak to hold the phone. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I should have been there. I can't fix that. But I can be here now. Let me help you like Simone helps you." Margaret's hand found his. Frank's expression softened. Then Margaret whispered, "You want to replace her?" "No, You think if you fix us, you'll stop feeling guilty about your mother." The words detonated. Jamie tried to backpedal, but the damage was done. They saw through him. His presence wasn't about them. It was about his own absolution. That night, he heard Simone's voice through the vents, consoling them. Jamie means well, but he's young. He doesn't understand that grief isn't something to fix. It's something to witness. I'll stay as long as you need me, however long that takes. Positioning herself as irreplaceable, as the only person who truly understood. Sunday morning, Jamie found Simone in the kitchen early. They had their first direct confrontation. She was pleasant, precise. "I know you're recording conversations, Jamie. I found the device behind the clock. I left it because I have nothing to hide. I'm helping your grandparents heal." His stomach dropped. "But you should ask yourself," she continued, pouring coffee with steady hands. "Why are you really here? For them? Or to alleviate your own guilt about Linda?" She knew everything. Knew his motivations, his weaknesses, his desperate need to prove himself. And she was confident enough not to stop him because she believed she was legally protected. With healthcare proxy and power of attorney, she controlled their medical and financial decisions. Jamie was documenting evidence for a case he had no legal standing to bring. Simone smiled, handed him a coffee mug. "Cream," No sugar, just like your mother took it. Monday morning, David's rental car headed north on I-5 toward Sacramento. Martha Reyes had given him a name, Rebecca Ortiz, and a warning. She might not talk. Simone's lawyer made her sign an NDA as part of the settlement. The private investigator's report sat in David's briefcase. Simone Wallace, born Simone Wagner. Name change filed in Sacramento County, 2019. 7 elderly clients over 10 years. 3 substantial gifts documented: $45,000, $67,000, $89,000. 2 adult protective services complaints, both withdrawn. A pattern. Not an isolated mistake with his parents. A business model. Rebecca met him at a Starbucks off Arden Way. 61, expensively dressed, hands shaking as she gripped her latte. She'd agreed to meet only after David explained his parents were Simone's current targets. "My father hired her in 2018, Rebecca said. 6 months after Mom died. He was lost. Simone was perfect." David opened his notebook. "Can you be specific?" She knew his favorite foods. She got him laughing again. Dad hadn't laughed since the funeral. She organized his medications, drove him to appointments, listened to his stories. Rebecca's voice caught. She made him feel like he mattered. When did things change? They didn't. That's what made it so insidious. Rebecca pulled out her phone, showed David documents. 3 months in, he changed his will. Left her his Roseville condo, worth $340,000. I only found out when he died suddenly. Heart attack. Simone showed up at the funeral with legal papers. David studied the will. Properly witnessed, notarized. Dated while Rebecca's father was demonstrably competent. His doctor had cleared him for cognitive function 2 weeks before signing. "We sued," Rebecca continued, but Simone's lawyer argued Dad was lonely, grateful, and generous. That we were greedy children who'd neglected him. They had evidence. Recordings of Dad saying we didn't visit enough. That we only cared about inheritance. Recordings he made voluntarily. Recordings she coached him to make. I heard them. Rebecca only calls when she needs something, doesn't she? It's okay to admit that. Leading questions disguised as therapy. David's jaw tightened. "Why did you settle?" "Because Simone threatened to countersue for elder abuse by abandonment. Because probate court would take years and cost more than the condo was worth. Because she had documentation showing Dad was happy. Photos, thank you cards he'd written, meal logs proving she provided excellent care." Rebecca's voice broke. She was exploiting him and genuinely helping him simultaneously. How do you fight that? The APS complaint? Withdrawn as part of settlement. She paid me $30,000 to walk away. I took it because I was exhausted and broke. Rebecca looked directly at David. "But I kept copies of everything. If you're building a case, I'll testify. NDA be damned." David drove back to San Jose with Rebecca's files and a sick understanding. Simone wasn't making mistakes. She was refining a system. Each family taught her what worked, what vulnerabilities to exploit, what documentation to create. Wednesday evening, he video called Jamie and his parents. Simone was conveniently grocery shopping. He explained gently. Rebecca's father, the Roseville condo, the pattern of isolation and gratitude. Margaret's response gutted him. "But Simone makes us feel close to Linda." Frank added, words halting. "Those other families, maybe they did neglect their parents." David ended the call and sat alone in his Seattle apartment, understanding the terrible truth. Simone hadn't just manipulated his parents. She'd made them complicit in their own exploitation. They couldn't see her clearly because seeing would mean admitting they'd been fooled. Martha Reyes was blunt when he called. "You can fight this, but it will cost $50,000 minimum. It'll be public and humiliating, and your parents might still choose her over you. Are you prepared for that?" David looked at his daughter's soccer photo on his desk, at the partnership offer letter he'd been avoiding, at the life he'd built by staying distant. "Yes," he said. "I'm prepared." Thursday evening, Jamie found his grandmother in Linda's old room, holding a jewelry box she'd avoided for months. Margaret lifted out a jade bracelet. "Linda wore this at her wedding. Simone said she wanted you to have the house because," her voice caught, "because Linda told her so, before she died." Jamie's pulse spiked. "Grandma, when exactly did we hire Simone?" Margaret's brow furrowed. "October? Early November?" Jamie pulled out his phone, found the contract David had forwarded. "October 23rd, 6 weeks after Mom died." The color drained from Margaret's face. "Simone never met Mom," Jamie said quietly. "She couldn't have. Mom died September 12th. Margaret set down the bracelet with trembling hands. "She's been lying." Frank appeared in the doorway, Walker scraping against hardwood. "What's wrong?" Jamie played the recording. Simone's voice, honey smooth. "Linda told me she wanted Jamie protected. She confided in me before she passed." Frank lowered himself into Linda's desk chair. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Margaret began to shake, not with grief, but with rage. "She used our daughter's death. She invented conversations that never happened. She made us believe," her voice broke. Frank reached out his good hand. They sat together in their dead daughter's room, and Jamie watched the architecture of Simone's manipulation finally collapse. This wasn't about money or legal documents. This was desecration. Using Linda's memory as currency, fabricating intimacy with a woman she'd never met, exploiting the rawest wound of their lives. "We tell her tomorrow," Margaret said, "that we need time to think." Friday morning, Margaret delivered the news with forced calm. "Simone, we need some space to process things." For just a second, Simone's mask slipped, calculation flashing cold before warmth returned. "Of course, I understand this is overwhelming. Take all the time you need." By noon, Simone had called Adult Protective Services. Jamie first learned about it when Gary Melendez arrived at 6 o'clock. Professional, wary, carrying a tablet. "I'm investigating a report of elder abuse. I need to speak with Margaret and Frank Chen, separately." "Abuse by who?" Jamie asked, though dread already supplied the answer. "By family members." Gary's expression was neutral. "You're Jamie Chen? I'll need to speak with you as well." The interviews took 2 hours. Gary separated them. Jamie in the kitchen, his grandparents in the living room and bedroom. Under questioning, exhausted and confused, they struggled to articulate why they suddenly distrusted Simone. "Your grandson installed recording devices without your consent?" "He was trying to protect us," Margaret said. "From someone providing excellent care? Someone you signed legal documents naming as your healthcare proxy?" Frank tried to explain about the fabricated Linda conversations. But his stroke-affected speech made it sound paranoid. The recordings Jamie offered as evidence, they sounded invasive, manipulative themselves. Simone arrived with documentation, health improvement logs, meal schedules, thank you cards Margaret and Frank had written weeks ago, expressing gratitude and love. Gary's preliminary finding was devastating. Pending full investigation, Simone remained primary caregiver and POA. David and Jamie were advised to cease direct interference. If they violated this order, APS could seek emergency guardianship, removing Margaret and Frank's autonomy entirely. After Gary left, Jamie called David. "She's turned it around. We're the abusers now." His brother's response was controlled fury. "We're not backing down. But we need to be smarter. We need legal strategy, not emotion." Jamie stood in the kitchen where he'd installed his first recorder, where he'd captured Simone's manipulation, where evidence somehow wasn't enough. His grandmother sat at the table, crying silently. His grandfather stared at nothing. Simone had weaponized the system meant to protect them, and she'd done it flawlessly. Saturday morning arrived with the weight of impossible decisions. Simone moved through the house like a ghost who'd won haunting rights. Polite, icy, utterly in control, she made breakfast. She administered medications. She smiled with teeth showing. David's red eye landed him at the house by 8 a.m., eyes hollow from sleeplessness and rage, barely contained. He found Jamie at the kitchen table, laptop open, recordings queued like evidence that no longer mattered. "She's still here," Jamie said unnecessarily. "Not for long." David's attorney voice, the one that won depositions. But Margaret and Frank sat in the living room, looking small and defeated. And when the brothers joined them, the silence felt like surrender. Martha Reyes appeared on Jamie's laptop screen at 9. Her San Jose office visible behind her. Professional, direct, brutally honest. "You have two options," she said. "Option A, comply with APS. Let the investigation run its course. 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Risk Simone cementing her control during that time. Option B, file an emergency petition for guardianship termination. Requires Margaret and Frank to testify they're being coerced, in court, publicly, admitting they were fooled." David leaned forward. "What happens if we lose option B?" "The judge sides with APS, and your parents could lose all autonomy. State-appointed guardian, facility placement, everything they're afraid of." Margaret's hands trembled in her lap. Frank's good hand covered them. The silence stretched. Jamie watched his grandparents, these people who'd raised his mother, who'd survived 58 years of marriage and Linda's death and stroke recovery, now reduced to case law and risk assessment. Then Margaret spoke, and her voice carried the steel Jamie remembered from childhood, when she'd run a reference desk and brooked no nonsense from patrons or computers. "I need to say something." Everyone turned. "I'm 76 years old. I have a master's degree in library science. I raised 2 children and buried one. I am not incompetent." Her voice didn't shake. "And I will not let a con artist use my daughter's death against me." Frank's words came slowly but clear. "We were vulnerable. She exploited that. But now, we see it. We'll testify." David looked at his mother with something like wonder. "It's going to be hard, Mom. Pike will try to discredit you, make you look confused, manipulated. Harder than Linda's death?" Margaret interrupted. "Than watching her disappear piece by piece over 9 months? This is nothing." Martha's expression softened. "I'll file the emergency motion today." But Monday brought complications wrapped in compromise. Gary Melendez arrived with a mediator, a woman with kind eyes and a bureaucrat's smile. They proposed a middle path. Simone remains as caretaker without financial power of attorney while the investigation completes. David started to object. Margaret surprised everyone. "We agree," she said. "Mom, we agree," she repeated, meeting Simone's eyes across the room. Something passed between them. Calculation meeting calculation. After they left, Margaret turned to Jamie. If we fight her directly, she'll dig in and drag this out. But if we make her think she's won, she'll get sloppy. Jamie stared at his grandmother. The librarian who'd spent 30 years managing information, understanding narrative structure, knowing when to hold books and when to let them go. "You're going to play along," he said. "I'm going to reclaim my story." Margaret stood. "Get your camera." That afternoon, while Simone ran errands, believing she'd successfully neutralized the threat, Margaret sat before Jamie's laptop camera and spoke for 47 minutes. "My name is Margaret Chen. I am of sound mind. I was manipulated, but I am not incompetent. Here's what happened." She detailed every lie, every fabricated conversation with Linda, every isolation tactic. Her voice never wavered. Her recall was devastating. When she finished, Frank took her place. "I have a stroke. I'm not stupid." She bet we were too ashamed. She was wrong. They were done being victims. They were reclaiming their narrative, one recorded word at a time. And Simone, confident in her legal protections, had no idea the walls were listening again. Martha Reyes arranged the evidence like an architect presenting blueprints. Tuesday morning, her San Jose conference room held 5 people who would decide whether Simone Wallace faced consequences or walked free. APS Supervisor Linda Kawamoto, Assistant District Attorney Brian Herrera, County Investigator Karen Yates, and Martha's paralegal, Tom Nguyen. David attended via video from Seattle, his face pixelated but expression clear. 47 hours of recordings, Martha said, cueing audio. Pattern evidence from 2 previous victims. Video testimony from competent adults who understand they were manipulated. They listened to Simone's voice, honey over steel, creating urgency around signing documents. Kawamoto's expression tightened. Herrera took notes in careful shorthand. "The problem," Herrera said after 20 minutes, "is juries. They sympathize with caregivers. They think families are greedy. We need more than manipulation. We need fraud." Martha slid documents across the table. Quitclaim deed, signed the same day as the will change. Transfers 25% interest in their home to Simone Wallace. Buried in estate planning paperwork, the Chens didn't understand what they were signing. Herrera studied the deed, his jaw working. That's actionable. Wednesday morning, Karen Yates arrived at the Chen house with a digital recorder and 20 years of interviewing experience. Simone was staying at a residence inn while the investigation proceeded. Suspended but not charged. Legally, still their healthcare proxy. Margaret sat across from Karen at the kitchen table, hands folded. "Why did you trust her?" "Because she filled the space Linda left." Margaret's voice was steady. "That's not incompetence, that's grief." "When did you realize you were being deceived?" "When I heard her claim Linda confided in her before dying. Linda never met Simone." Margaret met Karen's eyes. "Using my daughter's death as currency. That's when I knew." Frank's interview was harder. His stroke-affected speech required patience, and Karen gave it. She asked him to describe the quitclaim deed signing. Simone said it was standard estate planning. "I trusted her because she'd earned it." Frank's good hand gripped his walker. "She got me walking. She made Margaret laugh." Both things can be true. The help and the theft. Thursday morning, Karen interviewed Simone at the hotel. Tom and Gwen observed, taking notes. Simone was composed, professional. She presented as a dedicated caregiver wounded by false accusations. The quitclaim deed? Margaret's idea, a way to ensure I'd stay long-term, since they feared abandonment. She produced text messages, birthday cards, photographs from the memorial garden. "This family," Simone said, voice trembling slightly, "is attempting to control elderly parents who made autonomous decisions. I provided excellent care. Now I'm being punished for it." Karen called Martha afterward. "She's good. If this goes to trial, a jury might believe her." Thursday evening, Martha video called the family. The investigation's finding has shifted from abuse by family to potential exploitation by caregiver, but Simone hasn't been charged. She's still legally your POA and healthcare proxy until a judge orders otherwise. Margaret absorbed this. She's done this before. She knows how to wait us out. "Which is why," Martha said carefully, "we need your formal depositions. On record, under oath. Lawrence Pike, her attorney, will try to discredit you, suggest memory issues, family pressure, vindictive motives." Frank's words came slowly. "When?" "Tuesday, 10 a.m., my office." After the call ended, Margaret sat at the kitchen table where she'd signed documents she didn't understand, where Simone had served meals that tasted like Linda's favorites, where 47 hours of recordings had captured truth beneath tenderness. "We tell our story," she said, "however hard it is." Jamie looked at his grandmother, this woman who'd run a reference desk for 30 years, who'd taught him that truth required careful documentation, and saw her preparing to testify not as a victim, but as a witness. Friday morning, Martha's conference room became a war room. Present: David, Jamie, Margaret, Frank, and Tom Nguyen. Absent: any illusions about this being easy. Martha distributed folders. "Lawrence Pike will attack from 3 angles. 1, your vindictive family members fighting over inheritance. 2, your confused elders with memory issues. 3, Jamie's a guilt-ridden grandson projecting failures onto a convenient target." She looked at each of them. "We preempt every attack." Margaret's prep began. Martha played prosecutor, her questions sharp. "Mrs. Chen, why did you sign documents without reading them?" Margaret had practiced this. "Because I was depressed after my daughter's death." Depression doesn't equal incompetence, it equals vulnerability. Simone exploited that. "But you wrote her thank you cards. You told her you loved her." "I did love her. She made me feel close to Linda again." That's precisely why the exploitation worked. Because the care was real enough to hide the theft. Martha softened slightly. "Good. Pike will try to make you look foolish. Don't let him. You trusted someone who earned that trust, then betrayed it. That's not stupidity. That's human." Frank's prep was harder. Stress affected his speech, words catching like gears grinding. Tom suggested bringing his physical therapy logs, cognitive function tests, all normal, and his doctor's letter confirming the stroke affected motor control, not judgment. "I have a stroke," Frank practiced, each word deliberate. "I'm not incompetent. She used my fear of being useless against me." Martha nodded. "Pike will speak slowly to you, like you're a child. Don't let it rattle you. Your slowed speech forces people to listen carefully. Use that." Jamie's prep focused on the recordings. California's 2-party consent law created risk, but exceptions existed for protecting vulnerable adults from exploitation. "Pike will call you invasive," Martha said. "Call you paranoid. He'll ask why you installed devices without permission." Jamie's answer: "Because I heard Simone pressuring them to sign legal documents secretly. That's not paranoia, that's probable cause." Saturday and Sunday, the family stayed together. They cooked, walked through Linda's garden, told stories. David's kids video called, and Marcus showed off a drawing of his grandparents' house. Sophie asked if they'd plant more flowers this spring. Yes, Margaret said, surprising herself. We will. Sunday evening, Martha called with complications. Pike subpoenaed Rebecca Ortiz and another previous victim's family. He'll argue they're financially motivated liars who settled because their claims were false. What do we do? David asked. Character witnesses. People who've known your parents for decades, who can testify they're normally cautious, competent, and loved Linda deeply. By Monday night, they'd secured 5. Margaret's former colleague from the library, Frank's physical therapist, their neighbor of 20 years, Linda's best friend, and their family doctor. Margaret couldn't sleep Monday night, not from fear of Pike's questions, but from the prospect of facing Simone again. Seeing the woman who'd held her hand through grief, who'd made Frank laugh, who'd planted Linda's garden, who'd used their daughter's death as leverage. Frank found her at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. We tell the truth, he said, his speech clearer in the quiet hours. That's all. The truth. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of testimony. Jamie drove his grandparents to Martha's office, hands steady on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, he watched Margaret hold Frank's good hand. They were ready, not because they felt strong, but because they decided their story mattered more than their shame. The depositions would begin in 2 hours. Simone would be there, Lawrence Pike beside her. Recordings would play, evidence would mount. And Margaret Chen, retired librarian with a master's degree and 58 years of marriage, would reclaim her narrative one careful word at a time. Martha's conference room felt smaller on Tuesday morning with Lawrence Pike present. Silver-haired, expensive suit, he projected grandfatherly concern while arranging depositions like chess pieces. Margaret sat across from him, hands folded, 58 years of marriage teaching her when to speak and when to wait. Pike began gently. Mrs. Chen, I'm sorry for your loss. Pancreatic cancer, devastating. He paused, manufactured sympathy settling. You experienced depression afterward, correct? Days you couldn't remember? Grief isn't cognitive decline, Margaret said, her voice steady, librarian clear. It's human response to unbearable loss. Pike shifted tactics. But how can you trust your memories of signing documents when you've admitted confusion? Because I have recordings. Not memories, evidence. Simone's voice, creating urgency, fabricating conversations with my dead daughter. Pike produced a birthday card, Frank's handwriting visible. Does this look like abuse, Mrs. Chen? Margaret met his eyes. It looks like gratitude. My husband was desperate for help. Gratitude doesn't negate exploitation. It's what made the exploitation possible. 90 minutes. Pike made no progress. Frank's testimony began after lunch. Pike spoke slowly, condescension barely masked. Mr. Chen, I'll speak clearly so you understand. I understand every word. Frank's stroke-slowed speech forced Pike to listen. I just talk slower now. Pike attacked the power of attorney signing. Why hadn't Frank consulted David? Because Simone said it was standard. Because she'd earned trust. She got me walking again. She cooked my favorite foods. Frank paused, each word deliberate. She saw me as a person, not a patient. So she provided excellent care? Yes. Frank's good hand gripped his walker. She also stole from me. Both things can be true. Pike showed physical therapy logs. Frank's improved mobility, increased stamina. Isn't it possible your sons are manipulating you to turn against someone who helped you? Frank's response silenced the room. My wife and I have been married 58 years. I know when she's afraid. When Simone was here, Margaret was afraid, not of me dying, but of saying the wrong thing and Simone leaving. That fear was intentional. That's abuse. Wednesday morning, Jamie faced Pike's calculated assault. You abandoned your mother during her cancer fight, correct? Yes. You felt guilty? Devastatingly. So when your grandparents bonded with Simone, you felt replaced? Jamie's programmer mind recognized the logic trap. No, I felt relieved, until I heard her manipulating them. Pike attacked the recordings. You installed surveillance devices without consent? California law permits recording when there's reasonable suspicion of elder abuse or financial exploitation. I heard Simone pressure them to sign documents secretly. That's probable cause, not paranoia. Pike played a recording of Jamie telling David, "We need to remove Simone permanently." He argued it proved family conspiracy. Jamie leaned forward. It proves we were trying to stop financial exploitation. If we wanted money, we'd have kicked her out and contested the will ourselves. We involved attorneys and investigators because we wanted truth, not revenge. Wednesday afternoon, ADA Herrera met with Martha, Karen Yates, and the investigation team. The testimonies were strong, clear, consistent, devastating. But Herrera's concern remained. A jury might sympathize with Simone. Caregivers get enormous benefit of the doubt. Martha argued strategically. Offer her a deal. Full restitution, probation, permanent ban from elder care. If she refuses, we bury her with pattern evidence from 7 victims. By evening, Pike called. Simone would accept. Full restitution, 3 years probation, banned from vulnerable adult care. No criminal admission, but civil finding of undue influence. Martha told the Chens, she's done. She can't do this to anyone else. It wasn't victory, it was compromise. But Margaret understood. Some battles you win by preventing the next victim. Thursday morning, 1 week after the plea deal, Tom and Gwen supervised Simone's departure. She arrived with a moving truck, collected belongings from the garage apartment without looking at the house. Margaret watched from the kitchen window. When Simone's truck disappeared around the corner, Margaret said quietly, "I thought I'd feel relief. I just feel tired." The practical challenge emerged immediately. They needed care, but trust felt impossible. David suggested a geriatric care management company, rotating staff, institutional oversight, no single person accumulating power. Margaret agreed but insisted on interviewing candidates herself. 7 interviews over 2 weeks. Margaret asked each the same question. Tell me about a time you disagreed with a client's family. What did you do? She was testing for boundary respect for people who understood autonomy. They hired Paolo, 45, former ER nurse with a blunt bedside manner. His first day, Frank tested him by refusing morning medications. Paolo's response: "Your choice. Here are the medical consequences: elevated blood pressure, increased stroke risk. I'll document your refusal. Want to reconsider?" Frank grudgingly took the pills. Later told Margaret, "He treats me like an adult. I like him." Jamie negotiated remote work 3 days weekly, staying in the garage apartment. Tuesday through Thursday he was present, Friday through Monday in Oakland. It was sustainable, not suffocating, not abandonment. David stopped managing and started showing up. Monthly visits, daily video calls that felt like connection rather than surveillance. He told Frank one evening, "I'm not your protector, I'm your son. There's a difference." Margaret returned to grief support group without Simone mediating. Made a friend, Doris, whose husband died 2 years ago. They got coffee weekly, compared notes on surviving. Frank joined a stroke survivors group at the community center. Learned he wasn't alone in redefining masculinity post-disability. 6 weeks later, new rhythms existed. Paolo arrived at 8, supervised medications and breakfast, facilitated physical therapy, departed by 2. Margaret cooked dinner. She'd forgotten how much she enjoyed it. Jamie handled tech issues and yard work. Evenings were quiet, but not empty. They FaceTimed with David's kids twice weekly. Sophie and Marcus, 8 and 11, made geography irrelevant through screens. One evening, Margaret showed Jamie a photo album she'd been creating. Pictures of Linda throughout her life, interspersed with new photos of the memorial garden in bloom. Acknowledgement that Linda was gone, but not erased. Frank's voice steadier now after weeks of therapy. Your mother would be proud. Not because you saved us, because you came back. The house smelled different, not decay or artificial warmth, but garlic and rosemary and soil. Sense of life continuing. They'd survived profound loss, survived exploitation. Now they were surviving in the best way, together, with dignity, surrounded by family that chose to stay. Early March brought milestones, Margaret marked on the kitchen calendar in careful handwriting. Frank had been cleared to drive short distances, celebrated by driving himself to the hardware store, returning with unnecessary screws and profound satisfaction. Margaret completed a watercolor series of Linda's garden, donating it to the hospice center where Linda received care. Jamie's promotion to senior engineer came with full remote options. David's family arrived Friday evening for a long weekend. Sophie and Marcus burst through the door with the uncomplicated energy of children who knew they were loved. "Grandpa, teach me chess," Marcus demanded, already setting up the board on the coffee table. Frank lowered himself into his chair, Walker positioned carefully. Patience, first rule of chess, is thinking before moving. Sophie found Margaret in the garden where early spring bulbs pushed through soil. "Can we plant something?" Margaret handed her a trowel. "Tulips, your mother's favorite when she was your age." Saturday evening, they gathered in Linda's garden as sunset painted the sky. David sat between his parents on the stone bench, his arm around Margaret's shoulders. "I've been offered a partnership," David said. "Requires relocating to San Jose." Margaret's hand found his. "You don't have to. I'm considering it." "Not out of obligation." David looked at Frank, then Margaret. "I missed a lot of Linda's life because work was easier than family. I don't want to miss yours." Frank's voice steadier now after months of therapy. "We'd like that." Sunday morning, Jamie installed the tablet system he'd been perfecting for weeks. Kitchen-mounted, large enough for aging eyes, simple enough for technophobic grandparents. Shared calendar, video calling, medication reminders. Digital photo frame cycling through family pictures. Margaret regarded it skeptically. "I don't understand these things." Her phone rang. Marcus's face filled the tablet screen, calling from the park 3 blocks away. "Grandma, watch Sophie's goal." The camera panned shakily to show Sophie kicking a soccer ball. Margaret's laugh surprised her. Spontaneous, unguarded. Technology wasn't intimidating when it connected rather than isolated. March 15th arrived with the weight of significance. Linda's birthday. What would have been her 56th. The family gathered at the memorial garden. Margaret had commissioned a bench inscription. Linda Chen Morrison, 1969 to 2024. Beloved daughter, mother, friend. Her garden grows. They planted a rose bush together, David holding it steady, Frank directing from his folding chair, Jamie filling soil, Margaret and the grandchildren watering. Collaborative, messy, life-affirming. That evening, Everyone crowded around the dining table. Paolo arrived with takeout, stayed for dinner, arguing good-naturedly with Marcus about soccer teams. Jamie helped Sophie with homework. David and Frank debated politics like they'd been doing it weekly instead of across 2 states. Margaret stood at the kitchen doorway, watching her reconfigured family. Linda once said she wanted her life to mean something beyond herself. Her voice carried clearly. I think this would count. Not because it's perfect, but because we fought for it. Jamie uploaded a photo to the family tablet. Everyone in the garden, muddy and laughing. The technology that had captured Simone's manipulation now captured healing. The house smelled different. Not decay or Simone's artificial warmth, but garlic and rosemary and soil. Sense of life continuing. Later, after David's family had driven back to their hotel, after Paolo had left, after Jamie retreated to the garage apartment, Margaret and Frank sat on Linda's bench in the cooling evening. They didn't speak. 58 years of marriage meant some things didn't require words. They'd survived profound loss, survived exploitation. Now they were surviving in the best way, together, with dignity, surrounded by family that chose to stay. The garden would need tending. The tablet would malfunction occasionally. Paolo would eventually retire, requiring new caregivers. Life would continue being complicated. But they'd built something sustainable. Not a return to what was, but something new. A family architecture that made room for grief alongside joy, that honored Linda's memory without being consumed by it. In the gathering darkness, Margaret's hand found Frank's. His good hand squeezed back. They sat watching stars emerge. 2 people who'd learned that healing doesn't erase loss. It just makes space for what comes next.